This is SGTV Weekly News with Spencer Buckler.
Coming up tonight, South Carolina is in the process of reopening, how the Social Media Insights Lab has tracked what people are saying online. USC is returning to in-person classes in the fall, but some students are deciding to take the semester off. And a partnership between student body president Izzy Rushton and former President Pastides to help combat the coronavirus. But first, the University of South Carolina could cut programs and furlough employees because of the coronavirus. The news was sent in an internal memo yesterday. The university has estimated that it already lost between $20 and $40 million this fiscal year, and future impacts are still unknown. USC policy requires that faculty has an input before any academic programs are cut. If the university does cut programs and faculty, it probably will not go into effect until 2021. Student body president Izzy Rushton announced yesterday that she was partnering with former President Pastides to recruit students to help with DHEC with contact tracing in South Carolina. Student body president Izzy Rushton joins me now. And Izzy, tell me a little bit about how this partnership came to be.
Yeah, so Dr. Pastides actually reached out to me. He was originally in Ireland, but he did return back to the U.S. a couple days ago. But he has been working on the Accelerate SC Task Force, which is under the governor. And so he reached out to me via email, said he had an awesome opportunity for students here at USC and something that I could get involved in. We spoke on the phone, and I thought it was a great opportunity for our students. I agreed with him, and it went on from there.
So what does this opportunity really entail?
Right. So the opportunity for students, it is volunteer. So I'm not, it's not mandatory for our student body by any means. The reason that I did kind of advertise it is that I do think that it is a good opportunity for students to get involved and get experience in contact tracing and management, whether that be health students or whether that be, a criminal justice student like myself. But what it involves is that it will, you do apply to the volunteer position. Once you're accepted, you will do a certification online. It takes about 1 to 2 hours to complete. You'll then be certified at the end in contact tracing and management. After that, you'll work with DHEC specifically through their kind of body to make sure that it goes through the proper channels, and you'll be contact tracing and helping to kind of rebuild South Carolina and propel it into the future.
So part of the university's policy about coming back is increasing contact tracing. What do you feel about the university's decision to reopen?
Right. So one thing I will say is that this DHEC opportunity is completely different to USC contact tracing and management. And I don't want students to think that it's one and the same, because it's not. The university has yet to make a decision on what that contact tracing may look like here at USC. Through every single decision, President Caslin has been adamant about ensuring that every decision is backed by science, backed by people who are experts in their area, and that they're making the correct decision. Personally, I think that, in order to rebuild a state, I think contact tracing is important. What that looks like on a college campus is going to be different, and I know that whatever decision the university makes will be the best one.
Well, it certainly is an interesting opportunity. Izzy, thanks for coming on. The university's Social Media Insights Lab gives an inside look at what South Carolinians are posting about. Lab manager Caitlin Park has been analyzing what people are saying about the coronavirus, and it's not as split as you might think. She's here with me now. Caitlin, tell me a little bit about this project.
Sure. Really, since the coronavirus started to become a significant social issue, we've really been studying that at the Social Media Insights Lab. When we were still actually on campus, I would say probably starting March 1st, we created a monitor related to the virus. It wasn't until March 11th that we started publishing information about what people were saying. And initially, I think we were looking more at national conversations and how those conversations compared to what people were saying in South Carolina. But over time, we realized that, South Carolinians actually were much more positive and optimistic about how things were going related to the pandemic. There were obviously a lot of questions about testing and how people were going to get tests, the availability of testing, the cost of testing. But we still always saw this undercurrent of optimism, togetherness. We're going to get through this together. sharing positive messages about the healthcare workers, emergency responders that were working with coronavirus. And then while still maintaining concern and worrying about their neighbors, their community members, really this undercurrent of optimism. However, with reopening, we didn't really know because we saw that trend, we weren't really sure what South Carolinians were going to have to say about reopening. What we found, we took different terminology. So we looked specifically at restaurants, storefronts, schools, the university, as well as certain businesses, and placed different terminology like reopening, reopen, back to business, reopen SC, things like that, and searched for that on Crimson Hexagon, which is the software that we use. And really surprisingly found that yes, there was a lot of optimism still about reopening. However, I think there still is also a larger part of the population that is still sharing concern and questions about what reopening actually looks like in the state.
So what would you say those proportions are, those people that are feeling positive versus those people that are still concerned about reopening?
Well, the first thing I would definitely say is that first and foremost, people are sharing news information. That was the larger population, was just sharing news articles, news mentions, quotes from different, quotes from different public figures, things like that. And then it was a much smaller population that actually shared their opinions on reopening. We did find that there were less people that were, there was more optimism probably about reopening, but there was still this undercurrent of concern. A lot of people weren't necessarily saying, I'm ready to reopen everything right now. It was more so, okay, I'm ready to reopen, but I'm also still concerned about how to do that safely. So I would say rather than a specific dichotomy or black and white, yes and no, there was definitely a spectrum of opinion that was related to reopening.
Now, you say the conversation isn't as polarized as it may seem. Tell me a little bit about that.
Exactly. Well, I think when you look at certain media stories about this, I think when you see protesters and things like that, you think that there is this really, passionate majority that is ready to reopen everything and get back to business as usual. But like I was just saying, that's not really the case. There are people who support reopening but want more, not necessarily restrictions, but want more guidelines in place for how to do that safely. There are people who are more skeptical of reopening who still want certain businesses to reopen. So I think you're going to find there is less of an us versus them mentality online, despite how it may seem in the media in particular. People are surprisingly, well, maybe not surprisingly. I think this is given people a reason to care about their communities more, and I think you find that rather than people being like, we need to reopen everything or we don't need to reopen at all. There's definitely a spectrum of opinion, and the thing that is definitely at the forefront of most people's minds is safety. However, one thing that we did find that was very interesting in the state of South Carolina, a lot of conversation about the beaches. A lot of people, even when they weren't necessarily okay with reopening everything, wanted to be able to go on the South Carolina beaches. So that was also, social media is never exactly what you expect.
Well, it's all very interesting, Caitlin. Thanks. South Carolina has tested less of its population for the coronavirus than any other state in the U.S. The report conducted by the COVID Tracking Project found that more than 84,000 people in the state have been tested. That is a little over 1.6% of the population. Since that report, about 5,000 more people have been tested, increasing the proportion by 0.1%. South Carolina is one of 13 states that have tested less than 2% of the population. In New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, over 1% of the population has tested positive for the virus. And last week, the University of South Carolina announced plans to reopen for the fall semester. But just because classes will be in person doesn't mean that all students will be returning. Managing editor of the Daily Gamecock, Nick Sullivan, joins me now. And Nick, you guys did a story on this. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so the story basically gets at the idea of if a student does decide that they don't want to come back in the fall or they want to take a semester off, what exactly do they need to know before making that decision? Because obviously we will be back on campus as of now, that's the plan, but COVID-19 is still going to be a concern for some people. Maybe they don't want to take the health risks, or also campus life is still going to be very different because of social distancing. So with all of that in mind, what do those students need to know in order to make the most educated decision for themselves?
And what do they need to know? What are some of those big things?
Yeah, so basically they broke it down into three main offices that a student will need to contact before they make their decision. And that is the admissions office, financial aid, and their academic advisor. So with admissions, for example, the biggest issue that they'll see is maybe a student will notify the admissions office too late. So whereas if they wanted to take the fall off, come back in the spring, they would pretty much have to tell them right now about that decision. Otherwise, they run the risk of not being able to return until the following fall. Then with financial aid, not all scholarships will be held for them. So if a student just decides to take a semester off without talking to the financial aid office, then maybe if it's a merit-based scholarship, for example, they might pass it along to the next most eligible person who's going to be on campus. And they stress that you can get those things deferred, but it'll take a petition and it's kind of a process to it. And then finally, with academic advisors, some classes are only offered in the fall. So if a student decides that they want to take the semester off, well, they might then run the risk of delaying their graduation an entire year because the class that they need isn't offered until the fall. And those are just some of the biggest issues that they talked about.
So from what you can tell, is the university making it any easier on students to do this?
They really want this form, from the way that they described it, to be very expedited. The purpose of it is just kind of get an idea of, did the student change addresses, phone numbers, did they take any classes online or anything during the gap, and just kind of getting them right back into the process. They said as of now, they haven't really had that much of an increase in students requesting a gap semester or semester off or anything. But depending on the want for that, if there does seem to be significant interest, then they might adapt the process even more to make it even more streamlined. But yeah, as of now, they haven't really adapted it so much because of COVID.
Well, it's all very important stuff to know. Thanks, Nick. Well, that does it for weekly news. From all of us at SGTV, stay healthy, and we'll see you next week.